outside? Should I run and hide? How do I take my company worldwide? Do you love the law? Did you watch Hee-Haw? What's the weirdest thing that you ever saw? What's it like in court? Favorite sport? Can you help with my book report? Is my hair too long? Am I right or wrong? And do you mind if I sing along to anything? Ask Alan anything in the world.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Ask Alan, the podcast. I'm Alan Crone, the CEO of the Crone Law Firm. And today, I think we have a very interesting time. It's always interesting when Mack Bradley is around. Full disclosure, Mack and I have known each other a long time. We've been, at one point or another, we've been business partners. We've worked on political campaigns and lobbying efforts and all kinds of things. And Mack is the founder and CEO of StandPoint Consulting in St. Louis, Missouri. And Mack, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Well, excellent. We are, as I said, Mack and I have known each other a long time. Mack, tell us a little bit about your work at StandPoint. What are you doing? What's going on these days?
Yeah, well, again, first of all, thanks for having me on. We at StandPoint, we've been in business for a little more than 12 years now, I guess. We're a public affairs and communications consultancy. Our clients are both public and private sector. It's a pretty good mix. We do a lot of crisis communications also. Most of the things, frankly, that we get involved in are complex in some way. They're either strategically complex or politically complex or difficult from a messaging perspective. And that's the sort of thing we gravitate towards, because that's always a challenge and that's always interesting. And I will say the best thing about having been in this business for a dozen years is the tremendous fortune of being able to work on things that we feel like are important and make a difference. And, you don't always get that opportunity. So we're excited to have those opportunities.
Well, and you don't get those opportunities overnight. You've got a real solid background in politics and public affairs in St. Louis, going back to one of your first jobs out of college.
Yeah, that's right. My first real job, I guess you'd say, out of college was in the mayor's office here, and I was very fortunate, frankly, to be a kid from nowhere. No political connections, no family ties or anything like that, I guess you would say. So I was very fortunate to get a foot in the door there.
So you were, taxing my memory here, you were a neighborhood liaison officer?
Right.
That's and right. Do they still have those? I mean, is the mayor's office that way?
Yeah, every administration takes the important step of renaming these positions. So it seems like it was your own idea, right? But that's right. The mayor that I worked for started this concept of having people who could advocate for particular neighborhoods within the executive branch, within the administration, and direct services kind of root out problems and help people cut through the red tape at City Hall, that sort of thing. So the position still exists, but it's on its fifth or sixth name by now.
And then you went to work for the legislative branch.
Right. I worked in we call I think you guys call it a city council down there. We have a board of aldermen, which is a much older name, as I understand it, for that sort of thing. So I worked for what most people would call the speaker of the board of aldermen here.
And all of that, what kind of lessons did you learn, in your 20s and 30s doing that kind of work? How did that prepare you for what you're doing now?
It's it's really interesting that my time at City Hall was, there was a lot of change going on. It was also a time of both a lot of promise and a lot of problems at City Hall. And my first boss was an impatient person, I think it's fair to say, who like to go and get things done and let's try this and let's try that. When you're in, I mean, people view this differently. In my view, that's a great skill to have in city government, because you don't have a lot of time to sit around and wait, right? Things happen very quickly, and the problems that you're trying to address are usually pretty immediate. The people are not very far removed from government at the local level, and if you're succeeding, then they see it, and if you're failing, then they certainly see that. So for me, it was, man, I got a lot of experience in a short period of time, because there was some kind of crisis always happening, right? Like every day there was some kind of new crisis unfolding, and learning, I think, the temperament that's required to deal with an almost perpetual state of crisis and keep your act together in the middle of that has certainly served me well later on.
And you also have an advanced degree from Washington University in is it international relations? Excuse me.
International affairs, right?
And what motivated you to go that direction?
So, most people, I think, probably go and get an advanced degree because it has some immediate practical value in their lives. That was not my approach. I have always been interested in that topic. And at that time, I was interested in doing something that was intellectually challenging. It was different from the work that I was doing. When I started that program, one of my biggest client was a multinational firm, and we were doing some stuff in Europe at the time and those sorts of things. But quite honestly, it was just my interest. It was something that I was interested in.
And understand that you've also been involved with the War College.
Yes, I did a program at the Air War College, which is the Air Force version of War College, called the National Security Forum, and where several civilians. I've never served in uniform, but in this program, the Air Force selects several civilians to spend time with the outgoing War College class at the final week of their academic year, and that was a tremendous experience. And I've always had a healthy respect for people in uniform, people who choose to put on the uniform. But I certainly came out of that experience with an even heightened level of awareness and respect for those folks. And the education that they go through at the War College was also very impressive.
What kind of takeaways did you get from that experience?
So there are a couple different ways to answer this. The outgoing class, the outgoing cohort that I was with were people from all branches of the military, not just Air Force. In fact, our session was led by an Army colonel who had been a ground forces commander in Iraq. And but we also had people from Poland and the United Arab Emirates and Canada, basically American allies. And all these folks were colonels who are going to leave the War College. And in the case of some of the allied members, they're going to go off to be chiefs of staff to their national air forces. And one of the things I learned was just the intellectual rigor that they bring to it, the historical perspective that they have. I don't know why I didn't really expect, I would say I didn't expect it. I didn't think about that in advance. But they took a very serious and historical view of what they were doing. And to be really candid with you, there was one issue that came up with civilian leadership while we were there. And the history that we have in this country of people in uniform not criticizing their civilian leaders, at least not in public. And there was an incident that occurred that I won't get into the details of, but when we got back into our cohort, it was clear to me that the Americans in the room, the ones in uniform, were very reluctant to criticize their civilian bosses. Those of us who were civilians in the room kind of had to pick up the baton and say, you know, something happened today that we feel like was insulting to our foreign allies here in the room. And as Americans, we want to apologize to you for what happened, because our countrymen here in uniform probably feel like they can't. And that was all really interesting.
That is interesting. And I think it's, you know, the military in the United States, I think, has done a remarkable job keeping that separation. And that's probably one of the things that's kept our democracy as solid as it is, because the military doesn't get involved in politics and domestic issues.
I think I've said this to many people recently in particular. This is one of the only countries in the history of the world where the leadership of the country, in discussions about the political leadership of the country, no one ever asks where the Army stands. Right?
Right.
You know, no one ever asks what the Army's opinion is of who should run the country. And that's remarkable and something we should be proud of. And I saw that on display in this scenario. I mean, would it have been dangerous for the folks in uniform? And I mean, this was a relatively small cohort of people, but they still took that really seriously.
Right. And it's that discipline in small things that makes for stability in larger things.
Absolutely.
Well, now this was news to me as I was preparing for this. I thought I knew everything there is to know about Mack Bradley, but you've written a book.
Yes.
And the title is "The Space to Lead: International Cooperation and Competition in Outer Space" by Mack Bradley.
That's right.
All right.
Very exciting, right?
It is very exciting. Tell me about tell me what led up to your decision to write a book, to write this book.
Well, it came out of my master's work. At the end of the master's program, I'm sure you can appreciate this. You have an opportunity to do one of two things. You can either write a research paper, which, you know, only has to be something ridiculous like 40 nonsense pages or something like that, or you have to write a real thesis, which is a full-blown thing. Now, which one do you think I chose to do?
I think you chose to write a thesis.
You really went out on a limb on that.
Yeah, particularly the way you described.
Yeah, the setup,
the
right,
research
was
paper
perfect.
As being a, what I think you said, nonsense. So
nonsense,
go ahead.
Right? Yeah, nonsense. No offense to my.
Oh, it's good on you though.
Who decided to do the research paper? So I decided to do the thesis there, and in international affairs, most students have an area, what's called an area study. You know, their specialty is Indonesia or Southeast Asia or Northern Europe or a particular country. I decided to choose for my region outer space,
which shocks me. I want to point out to our viewers, if you're listening to this on a podcast, you don't see this, but over Mack's left shoulder is his diagnostic board for his Starship. As long as I've known Mack, he's been a big Star Trek fan. He and my wife are huge Star Trek fans. I thought I was a big Star Trek fan until I started talking to Mack and my wife about it. But it is shocking that you picked outer space as your concentration area, which as we sit here today is both a very small and a very huge geographic area to claim.
Well, I remember selling it to my advisor as it is admittedly a very large area of study. But like you said, not nearly as big as you would think, which is one of the whole points of the thesis, is that low Earth orbit, where most of our stuff resides up there, is very crowded and getting more crowded all the time. One correction for you, though, before we move on, that's not actually my Starship back there. It's the property of Starfleet. It would be nice if it were my Starship, but it's not. So anyway.
But since it's fictional, I think it could be anybody's Starship. Right. If you want to claim it, I mean, it could be yours. You could have bought it at a salvage, I'm sure once they're done, they can't all go into museums.
That's true. So yeah, I like how you think. It sort of came out of that. And I was interested in particular in what captured my attention was the International Space Station. The International Space Station cost about, actually, I don't have the inflation adjusted dollars, but in 2010 dollars, about $160 billion, which makes it the most expensive object ever created by humans. And the level of international effort and international cooperation that was required to make this project happen is unprecedented, except in time of war. So it's a big achievement. And I felt like there are a lot of challenges that we're facing, whether it's orbital debris, some people call it space junk. There's a lot of junk up there, and it's all traveling at 17,300 miles an hour. So when you get hit by a piece of it, it doesn't really matter how small it is. That's a really bad day. We have to think about things like planetary defense, by which I don't mean aliens, but asteroids, climate change. All of these things that are really big global problems cannot be solved by one nation alone. And the model that we have built since really the late 1980s with what we now call the International Space Station is a terrific model of international cooperation to do big, difficult, and expensive things. And we ought to be leveraging that experience better than we are. We ought to be leveraging that model better than we are. It was a mistake, and at least in my view, for the Congress to prohibit NASA from working with the Chinese Space Agency. They're prohibited by law from having any discussion or cooperation with China's space agency. Ignoring China just doesn't make any sense. They're too big. They're going to be too big a player in this, and inviting them into the ISS family it just makes all kinds of strategic sense with appropriate safeguards in place, right? But they're too big to ignore them. Same thing with India. India should be part of the ISS family and they're not. So one of the big themes of the book is that we need to take this tremendous win that we've had. It's been a win technologically, politically, scientifically, you name it, and figure out what we're going to do with it next, because these big problems we have to solve, we can't possibly solve by ourselves.
What do you think is the next big challenge for that international effort?
For the space station itself?
Well, for the space station itself and international cooperation in space.
Well, I think we absolutely have to get a handle on the orbital debris problem. Like I said before, low Earth orbit, the GPS satellites, for example, that you use every day in your phone, in your car and everything, those sit at a much higher orbit, but most of the communication satellites and things like that, the space station itself sits in what's called low Earth orbit. And it's getting crowded and more crowded every day. We're going to have to figure out a way to clean it up, to get rid of some of this junk so it's safe to fly up there. There was a theory postulated in the 1970s by a mathematician at NASA that said we may reach a point in time where space is inaccessible to us because we can't punch through low Earth orbit safely because of all the junk and debris up there. That's going to be a big problem. The space station itself is due to be decommissioned in just a few years. We're going to have to decide whether we want to extend the life of it or do something else. One of the reasons you build a space station to begin with is if we're ever going to go anywhere, either on the moon for an extended period of time or anywhere else, you have to know what happens to humans and machines when they're exposed to the space environment for a long period of time. And there's no way to find that out without doing it. That's one of the big reasons to build the space station to begin with. So we've got at least the beginnings of many of those components have been up there for more than 20 years now. And we've got a lot of good experience with what happens to equipment, at least, over that period of time.
Well, the activities in space have been a feature, if you will, or largely dominated by governments, but now the private sector is beginning to independently exert itself. As we tape this show, Sir Richard Branson shot himself into, I guess, sub-low Earth. It wasn't even low Earth orbit, was it? It was below that.
Yeah, his flight was suborbital.
And Jeff Bezos is going to do the same thing, I think, tomorrow. Which is not necessarily in this order, is the anniversary of the first moon landing and my birthday. And it's awful nice of Jeff to do that in honor.
It's definitely in that order.
Yeah. To do that in honor of me, it really is very nice.
You and Neil.
Yes. Neil, Neil, it was nice of them to land on the moon in honor of me.
I thought so.
I still get a phone call every July 20th from Neil Armstrong. Anyway, that's all neither here nor there.
Neil and Buzz both. I call him Colonel Armstrong, but you can call him Buzz if you want.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've known him.
I'm sorry, Colonel Aldrin. My mistake.
Yeah. See, I know him that much better. I know his last name.
I know.
Tell those
I'm
guys
impressed.
apart. Anyway, I've heard some people say that it's that it's a frivolous waste of money for them to be doing this. And I've heard other people say, hey, this is, they said the same thing about the Mercury missions and the Apollo missions, that they were frivolous. And what's your take on what's going on now with the private sector?
It may not surprise you to learn my take is a little complicated. First of all, one minor correction: none of this is being done independent of governments. So, SpaceX, for example, which is probably the most successful and famous private firm at the moment, nothing SpaceX has done would have been possible without money from NASA and contracts from NASA. I think this is really analogous to the contracts that the government let for airmail service in the 1920s. The ability for this country to build a commercial airline industry really grew out of what would not have been possible without the contracts that the government let for mail service, that allowed for the development of technology and new aircraft and procedures and practices and everything that we benefit from today with air travel. But there was also this long interregnum between the beginning of airmail service and really airline deregulation, I believe in the 1970s and 80s, that allowed what I'm going to call quote unquote normal people to be able to afford to fly. Up until that time, it was really a rich person's game if you were going to fly anywhere. And so I think that's what's happening now. I'm not sure I would go so far as to call it frivolous, but I don't believe that there's anything that they're doing right now that's, with the exception of SpaceX, that's really pushing the technological envelope. What Sir Richard Branson did, for anybody who saw that, he didn't go up on a rocket. His configuration was different. He had an aircraft that you have a second aircraft dropped from at about, I think, 42,000 feet, something like that. And then its rocket motor takes over and pushes it into suborbital space. Jeff Bezos is going up in a more conventional, with a more conventional architecture tomorrow with a rocket and a capsule.
Isn't that similar to the early space shuttle? Wasn't it launched off of or am I dreaming? Wasn't it launched off of like a 747 or something initially?
Not the space shuttle, but you may be thinking of the X-15. If everybody's out there, go Google X-15 right now. The X-15 was an experimental space plane that NASA built in the 1950s that was dropped from a B-52 bomber at high altitude. Neil Armstrong was an X-15 test pilot. That's how he got into the astronaut corps. In fact, a lot of the moonwalkers were X-15 pilots. So again, while what Virgin Galactic is doing is exciting, NASA did that in the 1950s, right? So at least I wouldn't consider that to be pushing the envelope very much. The one that's pushing the envelope is SpaceX, of course, because of their reusable rockets. Elon Musk is famous for saying that if you flew from New York to Los Angeles and they threw the airplane away at the end of your flight, the ticket would be extremely expensive. And that's one of the reasons that space flight has been so expensive over the years. You throw the airplane away at the end of every flight. Their real innovation is the ability to reuse the largest part of the rocket and use it again, and that really is a game changer.
So where do you think we are with this? What is the significance or lack of significance with the billionaire space race?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I have a hard time seeing the point of billionaire space tourism. Maybe there's something here I don't see in terms of igniting the imaginations of a new generation of scientists and engineers and inventors. If that's one of the results of this, then I think it certainly will have been worth it. But unless there's an element to it that's really driving technology forward, or driving our systems or our understanding of space forward in some way. Maybe part of it is from a regulatory perspective. The government has had to kind of scramble around to figure out, well, who issues a permit for this, right? I mean, who issues a license to SpaceX to say, yeah, you can fly this particular rocket and take these civilians up to space? Who does that? And as you know, as a lawyer, government regulation often lags behind the market and lags behind technology. So I will say one of the consequences of this commercial space race has been to kind of force government to get its act together and figure out who's in charge of this, who actually has to sign the permit to say that you can do this. So that's been helpful, because those are questions we really did need to answer.
So you don't think that the analogy between what's going on now and those early airmail contracts is real? The analogy really isn't solid, because you don't see this activity as a springboard to something else.
I don't see it in the short term. Now, again, in fairness, if you go back to the 1920s, we didn't have a whole lot of people flying on commercial aircraft until about 50 years later. So, it's a long fuse on this. And if that's true, it certainly will all be worth it. I mean, you can always make the argument that was, as you indicated earlier, it was made during Apollo, it was made during the shuttle program, all of these things, that this money could be better spent right here on Earth. I get the argument. And I get the argument particularly now, where we're in a time where we certainly have a lot of problems that we need to deal with. But I've always been a believer in the fact that, humans are, we're smart enough and capable enough to walk and chew gum at the same time. We can do more than one thing at the same time. And I think the exploration of space and the benefits that gives us is worth the effort.
Well, and that really, and as you say, really is kind of the long game, because we're, even the best case scenarios, we're a long time away from any real benefit or any real change in what we're doing. We haven't been back to the moon in 50 years and counting, and it takes these stages. It's going to take a while if we ever break out of forget our own solar system, just our own orbital system with the moon going to another planet. Seems, I know everybody says that it's years away, but it kind of feels like it really is decades away.
Well, that's certainly true. We have had some real benefits. I mean, Apollo drove the development of our entire semiconductor industry. I mean, there are all kinds of industries that were really invented by Apollo that we benefit from greatly today. I mean, almost everything in your phone, in one way or another, owes its life to the Apollo program, which, minus an effort like that, with a short timeline and a huge amount of public sector investment, I'm sure we would have developed these things, but it would have taken a lot longer, for it to happen, but for that investment over a fairly short period of time. And all the ways that you use GPS and all these other things, none of that stuff would be possible without spaceflight. There are very few parts of people's daily lives that aren't, in one way or another, affected by the fact that big percentage of what we consider to be our critical national infrastructure now flies above the 62-mile mark in Earth orbit.
Yeah, I'm going to sound like an old geezer here, but I'm not sure that too many things developed after 1995 I really need. I'm a big fan of air conditioning. Now I know that came way before 1995, so it can stay. But everything else, I guess it just depends on the application, how much our lives have really been improved because of all this. Although without all of this, we wouldn't be having this conversation in this way at this time. So, I guess I'll just sit on my porch and yell at the kids to get off my yard, as my son would say.
I'm shocked to hear you say it, but okay.
Yeah. Well, Mack, I've enjoyed our time. I think this has been a great conversation. Anything you'd like to add or to supplement with what you've already said?
I don't think so. We're excited to have the Crone Law Firm here in St. Louis.
Well, we're very excited to be there. As you know, I've had a lot of ties to St. Louis, and I've enjoyed increased trips up there to help staff the office and drum up some business and so forth. And we're looking forward to a lot more. My wife, who regular listeners to the show will know, is a huge Cardinals fan, has enjoyed getting to see a couple of games and hopes to see more.
Has she enjoyed them this year?
She's enjoyed
there have been
being in the
fewer
stadium.
of them truly enjoyable this year. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Yeah, she's enjoyed being in the stadium. Not necessarily with what's going on the field, but it's a process, right? Building a club is a process.
It's a process, and one of the things I'll say about St. Louis is not very many cities go into every baseball season with the reasonable expectation that we're going to be in the hunt right up to the end. I think folks in St. Louis sometimes forget that that's not how everybody looks at it. And we've had a very storied and successful history here. So we have the benefit of being able to go into spring training with the full expectation that we've got a good shot at playing in October. Not everybody has that. So I'll take that as a win anyway.
That's right. I mean, I think that, St. Louisans, I should know that. St. Louisans.
If you're going to have an office up here,
I
I
got to know that.
St. Louisans.
They have a reasonable expectation of assuming that at least for the first round of the playoffs, they will be involved. I mean, they may not have a realistic expectation to win, a world championship every year, but I think everybody thinks, oh, okay, well, it's just a matter of not whether we'll be in the playoffs, but how we're going to get in. So that is a testament to the organization. Yeah. And how far we'll go. Yeah. All right. Well, I tell you what, Mack, I want to have you back on later in the year to talk about Mardi Gras and at Soulard Mardi Gras and how the first Mardi Gras after the before times is going to go. And I know you're involved in planning that, and we're looking to be involved in it as well as a law firm. So that's going to be an exciting time.
That is going to be an exciting time. I can't wait for you to get quote unquote involved in Mardi Gras.
We need to talk about that.
Yeah, we do need to talk about that.
All right, everybody.
We need to make sure to include your wife in that discussion.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. That's probably true. Well, all right. Well, on that note, we're going to conclude this episode of Ask Alan. I want to thank again Mack Bradley at StandPoint Consulting being our guest today. And if you've enjoyed this, and let's not kid ourselves, you enjoyed this a lot. We talked about outer space, and we talked about Mardi Gras. So, I mean, you don't get much more than that in terms of diversity. So share us, like us on social media, all that good stuff. And Mack is going to go manage some crisis, and I'm going to go get some justice. So thank you all very much.